drop hints.
March 16th is the tomato bash.
How do they find?
And now we should be good. Watch out for yourself.
Yeah, it's on.
Good evening, everyone. This is Joanne Nodal, and I'm with the Brazoria County Master Gardeners. And we got a treat for you tonight. Just wanted to tell you a little bit about the Brazoria County Master Gardeners. We are a local nonprofit organization associated with Texas A&M AgriLife, the Brazoria County Extension. Our AgriLife Horticulture Extension Agent, Kimberly Mayer, is our advisor, and we are ambassadors in the community to help our gardening friends and people who want to learn more about gardening understand the things, how to garden in Brazoria County, what works well here, what plants do well in Brazoria County. We're here to help you with that. We want to let you know that coming up, we have a tomato basil bash on March 16th, and I'm going to be dropping more information about that event in the comments along with this presentation. We hope that you'll take a look at it and come and join us for the tomato basil bash. And now we have August and Ruth Aimone, who will be presenting tonight on tomatoes. Tomato 101. You're going to learn all the things you need to know for planting, growing, caring for, and harvesting tomatoes in our Brazoria County area. I'm going to turn it over now to Ruth to get started, or August to get started.
Good evening. I'm August, and I understand that you love tomatoes and you want to try growing them. Well, you're in the right place because this is Tomatoes 101. And we're ready to begin. Maybe it's not working. There we go. So here's what we want to cover tonight. We want to talk about the location and soil preparation, with the location of your garden and how to prepare your soil. We want to talk about determinate and indeterminate tomatoes. We'll explain all this. Different varieties that are out there. Seeds and seedlings. Which one do you use? Do you use them both? Caging and staking. Tomatoes should probably always be caged or staked. Common diseases of tomatoes and their bug friends, because you know they got friends. Taking care of your tomatoes, how to water, fertilize, and prune. And last of all, harvesting and eating. I didn't put the eating because I figured you'd know what to do. So the first thing we want to do is plan your tomato garden. And there's three concerns that you should be aware of: size of the garden, the location of the garden, and how many tomato plants to plant. Well, the size of the garden, you need to think about two questions. How much time do you have to work in the garden? And how much space do you have to have a garden? In the little box at the bottom, these are our thoughts. First of all, start out small. It's always easier to add to the size of your garden each season than it is to lose interest because you just started out too big and you didn't have time to work in the garden every day. And gardening is usually an everyday type of undertaking. So, questions about the location of your garden. Where do you want to put this? Well, there's some things you need to make sure you have when you are putting out a garden. First of all, how much sunlight does the proposed location get each day? Are there things in the surrounding area that can harm the things growing in the garden? And what about drainage of the area you're looking at? Well, our thoughts: tomatoes love heat, so they need at least 6 to 8 hours every day of sunlight. Your garden also will require a fence if you have animals or varmints, as it were, outside that could get in and dig around in your garden and tear it up. So you probably want to put up a fence if that's the case. And your garden also needs good drainage. You don't want it in an area where the water flows after a rain and just sits there, because that'll drown the plants. So you need good drainage. But you also need to have your garden close to your water source. And I don't mean rain, I mean like from a faucet. You don't want to have to carry buckets of water. I've done that before and it's not fun at all. So you want to be close where you can bring a hose over and water your garden.
Most importantly, this is Ruth. I just hear from you this evening. How many tomato plants should you plant? The answer to this question depends on several factors. How much space do you have? How big a garden are you going to start with? Remember, start small. You can always increase the next year. What kind of tomatoes do you like? We have different types. We have cherry, we have small, we have paste. What do you want to do with your tomatoes? Do you want to eat them fresh in a salad? Do you want to can them? Do you want to cook with them in a sauce, with a spaghetti sauce? How many people in your family are going to enjoy this wonderful fruit that you're going to be fixing for them? Let's talk about the size of the garden. A typical tomato plant will be about 3 feet wide when in full maturity. When you first plant and you see a tiny little seedling, you're going to think, oh, I don't need that much room, but you really do. So we're talking about 10 feet of length for 3 tomato plants. Rows should be 3 feet apart if the plants are staked or caged, either one, and they need to be 4 or 5 feet apart if it is not. I lost my train of thought. Rows should be 3 feet apart if the plants are staked or caged, and 4 to 5 feet apart if they're not staked or caged, because they need room to grow. This should be a good indication of the size needed for a tomato garden. Tomato preference and consumption. What kind of tomatoes do you like? What do you want to do with the tomatoes that you grow? If you prefer cherry tomatoes, the plants will take up less space. Where beefsteak tomatoes, your beefsteak tomatoes are your 1 to 2 pound tomatoes. They will take up much more space because when you take one slice of beefsteak, it'll fill up your hamburger or your sandwich. If you're planning on canning tomatoes, in addition to the ones that you're going to eat and cook for your meals, you'll need more plants. So how many plants do you need per person for eating? I believe the consensus is that 2 plants per person will work just fine. Now, we have 2 categories of tomatoes. They're divided into 2 categories by their size and the production timing. So when you go to purchase your seedlings or even your packet of seeds, you need to check and see, do you want determinate or do you want indeterminate? Determinate tomatoes are tomatoes that grow on a bush. Your plant will be short. It'll only be about 3 or 4 feet. It will still need to be staked or put into a cage. It produces all its tomatoes within about 2 weeks' time. They look kind of short and bushy, okay? Indeterminate tomatoes are the ones that grow like a vine. They're tall. It can grow up to 6 feet plus. It definitely needs to be staked or caged, and it produces tomatoes throughout the whole season. Now, the season we're talking about probably starts in March and probably ends sometime in May or early June when the bugs start coming in. So here's your varieties of tomatoes. And even though we're only showing you a few, there's probably more than 10,000 varieties of tomatoes out there. These are 8 different tomatoes that are very popular here in Brazoria County. So the first category is your globe tomatoes, and the variety of the tomato is a Marglobe. Days to harvest. Now, what you need to understand about days to harvest, just real quickly, is that days to harvest starts from the time you put the plant, the seedling, into the ground, not when you plant the seed to start growing, not as it's growing in your propagation tray, but when you put your tomato seedling into the ground, ready to start there, that's when your days of harvest start to count. Okay, and so that particular tomato is a determinant. It's a little bush tomato plant that will grow and produce within the first 2 weeks after it starts to harvest. Your beefsteak tomatoes, I said, are your big slicers, your 1 to 2 pound slicer tomatoes. Henderson Ponderosa is probably your most popular. It's 80 days to harvest, and it is an indeterminate, which it could grow to 6+ feet. Cherry tomatoes, the most popular one we have here is your tropical sunset. If you'll notice the days to harvest, that's when your little cherry tomatoes will be ripe and ready to eat. Again, it is an indeterminate. It will grow 6+ feet. Your plum tomatoes, those are your cooking tomatoes. San Marzano is probably your most popular. 80 days to harvest, an indeterminate. Your mid-sized tomatoes, those are your 7 to 9 ounces. And the one that's most popular here is Celebrity Plus. We also have Wisconsin 55 or Campbell's 33 that also works in this area. Days to harvest, 78. It is a determinant. Your heirloom tomatoes, which are supposed to be the most flavorful, they've got that old tomato taste. Your mortgage lifter, Cherokee Purple is another popular one. Days to harvest, 75 to 85. It is an indeterminate. 10 to 12 ounce tomatoes, those are your little bigger ones, not quite as big as your beefsteak tomatoes, but they're large. We have Bella Rosa, 67 to 75 days to harvest. It is a determinate. Specialty tomatoes, you have your Juliet, you also have a Jolene. They are 60 days to harvest, and it's an indeterminate. Now let's go back and review just real quick. Your determinate tomatoes are your little bushy tomatoes. They will grow and mature, and within a 2-week period, they will produce all their tomatoes. Can you replant them? You can probably stagger your planting. When you plant your first plant, your first seedling, maybe 2 weeks later, you can plant the same tomato plant again, seedling again, to start another round of tomatoes. Your indeterminates, don't worry about those. As long as they're well fed, watered, fertilized, they will continue producing, hopefully before the bugs get them, because those come quickly in the early summer. Did it go? Oh, tomatoes can be planted in containers, which you see on the very left side. They can be planted in a raised bed, which is your middle picture, or they can been planted in ground. Now, your containers will probably only take one plant. There are some tomato seedlings that you could probably do 2 to a container. I don't usually advise that because your tomatoes need lots of room to grow and have air. Your raised beds, as they're fully grown, they need room for their branches to spread, so they need that 3 feet span. And then, of course, your in-ground also needs the same span, but if you'll notice, they are all staked up. Those are probably indeterminates that you're looking at in your raised bed and your in-ground. Those are your 6+ foot tomatoes plants. Now we can go. Okay, so containers. Tomatoes can be planted in any container. It is within your own imagination what type of container that you would like to use. But you need to have at least a container that is 3 gallons in size. Make sure that it has drain holes on the side of your container toward the bottom. You don't put drain holes on the very bottom of your container because then the water drains from your container. It gets the ground around it wet, it stays wet, and tomatoes don't like what we call wet feet. That means their roots never have time to dry out. They are constantly wet. You fill your container with potting soil and you plant your seedling. A seedling, you probably know more as a transplant, but we call them seedlings because they're the first growth from the propagation into a container or a bed. Now, when you do plant your seedling, you keep a record. That's when your harvest days start. When I put that seedling into my container, I want to keep a record of when it was planted to compare days to maturity that you will find on the back of your packet of seeds, or hopefully it will be on the label that is on the container, the little 4x4 usually container that you purchase either at your box store or your feed store or even a nursery. Okay, now you're not seeing any drain holes on that container there on the right-hand side. I am assuming that they're probably on the bottom, which is not a good idea. So just make sure that if you have a container like that, it can sit on top of a pallet or something to keep it up, a brick or something. You want air between the bottom of the container and the actual soil. Or it can be in a tray. And next, we have our raised bed. Raised beds you can make from almost anything that will hold your soil. Now be real careful what you use though. A lot of people tend to use lumber, which is fine. We recommend 2 inches by 10 to 12 inches. We do not use treated lumber. It's a little bit more expensive to buy the untreated, but you never know what the lumber is treated with. And so those chemicals could leak into your soil. So be very cautious what you use as your border for your raised beds. You can make your raised bed as long as you have room for it in your garden and how much you can take care of it, but do not make it more than 4 feet wide. And the reason for that is you probably have a 2-foot span reach with your arms to be able to get in and to weed or to help till the soil or to harvest your tomatoes, okay? Leave the bottom uncovered. When you first start it, you want to cover it with cardboard. But here again, be very careful that the cardboard that you use is not waxed, that it's just straight paper. It will eventually deteriorate and it will help keep the weeds down a little bit. That's one of the advantages of a raised bed is that you have control of the soil that you're putting into your raised bed. You have less weeds. So that's one of the bigger advantages if you have room in your yard to actually have a raised bed. But here again, even though it's a small bed, you still want to plant your tomatoes only 3 feet apart So you may not have room for too many tomato plants depending on how big your raised bed is. But if you'll notice in the picture, they are all completely staked. Those are probably bamboo stakes. Bamboo stakes are extremely strong and sturdy, or you can use what we call a T-post. Either one of those would work. They're not necessarily in a cage. Sometimes that takes up a little bit more room, but they do work with a bamboo stake. The in-ground requires most of the work, more than your container and your raised bed. Simply because you have to completely till your soil to make it nice and soft, to have room for the roots to grow down. You've got to add plenty of compost, mix it in, till it in. If you till though, understand that while you're tilling your compost and your soil to soften it up for the roots of the tomato plants, you're also tilling in the weed seeds. So be very careful. If it's any way possible where you could just use a pitchfork instead of a tiller, maybe start off with a tiller and then maybe finish mixing it all up with a pitchfork, you might not mix up the weed seeds as much. You want to mulch around the plants to help manage the weeds that do get seeded and start growing, but it also is a great barrier to retain the moisture into your soil for your tomato roots. If you do an in-ground bed though, please do not walk on the bed. It will compact your soil and it will make it harder for your roots on your tomato plants. So make sure that you do rows. If you look on the picture, that's a row, and you'll see the soaker hose going down the middle of the row. And we'll talk about watering in just a little bit, but that's an excellent source of watering if you have that ability to soaker hose, because it'll give your deep watering that you need. And if you'll notice, it looks like they've got hay, some kind of hay as a mulch. It helps keep the moisture in. It helps keep the roots cool so that they don't get hot. So what do we plant? Do you use seeds or seedlings? Remember, your seedlings you probably know better as a transplant. If you plant seeds, you must start indoors about 6 to 8 weeks before the last frost date. For South Brazoria County, our last frost date is March 17th. For Northern Brazoria County, our last frost date is around March the 30th. Okay, now, we planted tomato seeds the 1st of December, and we're just now bumping them up in the greenhouse at B's. So keep in mind that even though we planted our seeds on the 1st of December, we're still not putting them out. They're still starting to grow into little plants for us. So if you're going to do seeds, keep in mind your time frame. They do take that much time to actually grow before you can actually put them outside into the ground. Okay. Follow your directions on your seed packet. It gives you a ton of information: when to plant, how deep to plant, days to harvest. And you plant your seed into what we call propagation trays, or a little small container. It looks like a little pill bottle about the size of it, because that seed needs to have full contact with the soil that's inside your container to help it retain its moisture and to be able to start growing. It will produce roots and then have germination at the top with the first 2 leaves. Make sure that the seed is not deeper than 1/4 of an inch, and it makes good contact. And like I said, contact with the seed, it's got to be the entire seed. It's got to touch all the soil. We water from the bottom up. When you put your seeds into your little container, put them into some kind of tray that holds water, and you water in the container. You don't in the tray, sorry, you water in the tray. You don't water on the propagation container. It helps keep the soil moist, but it helps the seed break open and go down looking for water, so the roots will start to grow down. In about 6 to 8 weeks, you're going to have a seedling. It'll be 4 or 5 inches tall, It's ready to come out. You can plant it outside if it's warm enough that you're sure there's no more frost. Or you can put it into a little larger container. We usually have what we call 4x4. And that's our intermediate planting. We go from our propagation to our 4x4, and then we put it into the ground or a container or a raised bed. Now, seedlings are your very small tomato plants. That's usually what you find at your feed stores, your nurseries, your box stores. To make life simple, you can buy these in the spring. They're probably starting to come in right about now. But there's so much gratification if you could do your own. If you have the ability to plant your own seeds, keep them in your house by a windowsill, keep the bottom warm. It's really a neat project for the family to do.
Since we're planting seeds or seedlings, before you do that, it might be a good idea to have your soil tested. And it doesn't even have to study for the test. You get a very invaluable information about your soil when you have it tested. The best place to do it, send it up to Texas A&M. They'll give you an entire printout of everything your soil needs. And you send the soil in the mail, they send the report back in the mail. And it's a reasonable fee. And it should be done about every 3 years or so, because you want to know what to add to your soil to make sure it's the best soil you can possibly use. Now that we've picked a spot for the garden and we're ready to plant, let's see what you have to do. You got to remove weeds, rocks, debris, anything that will keep the roots from getting farther down. And I might add at this point that tomato plants, when they're growing, their roots can go deep, deep, deep into the ground. I'd say a conservative estimate would be 2 feet. It could go long farther. You always would like to amend your soil with organic material. This would be anything like compost or things that have begun to decay, greenery that has begun to decay. You can mix it in to the soil on a regular basis, anytime you want, as much as you want, because the soil loves organic material. You'd like to have the top 8 to 12 inches nice and loose, easily crumbled soil. That's what you want. That's where you want to put your seeds and your seedlings. Do not compact the soil. Again, don't walk on your soil, because then it gets hard and the roots need oxygen. And if you've compacted all the soil, the air can't get in there. And please remember, do not work with your soil when it's wet. All you're going to do is have a bunch of clumpy chunks of soil, and it's not going to be pretty. The best thing to do is wait until you can take a handful of soil and squish it in your hand and open it up, and it should be somewhat together, maybe falling apart just a little bit. That's the perfect time or the perfect wetness of the soil.
Okay, so now we have our seedlings we want to plant. Mid-March through April is the ideal time to plant. That's when you're just about guaranteed no more frost. And by this time in mid-March, you've got your soil worked. It's nice and soft, ready to go. It's fertilized, it's composted, it's probably even mulched. In your containers, the same thing. You've got your little amount of soil. You've got it fertilized and amended, ready to go. So you're going to put your transplants into holes. Now we're talking, this is a raised bed or an in-ground. Your transplant holes are 3 to 4 inches deep, and they're at least 2 to 3 feet apart. 2 to 4 feet, sorry, 2 to 4 feet apart. 3 feet is ideal. Now, if you have a container, the 3 to 4 inches deep still stays the same. Then your containers must be at least 3 4 feet apart. And this is where I wouldn't do the 2 feet, I would do the 3 to 4 feet apart between the containers. If the tomato plant has a long stem, plant the stem lying down in a trench with just the end of the plant sticking up. This means you're going to plant diagonally down. So you want the top part of your seedling up above the ground, and you want the long stem down at a slant into the ground, into the soil. All the little fine fibers that you see on the stem of a tomato, those are roots. So when you plant your seedling diagonally down into your soil, all those little fibers are going to become roots. It doesn't work that way with your containers. Like I said, I have a container garden at my home. I use 5-gallon buckets. I do plant my tomato stem down deep so that it does get those fibers to become roots. Okay. Fertilize at planting and again at bloom set. So you can mix some granular fertilizer into your soil before you plant, and that's part of preparing your soil. You can do that before you put your seedling in, mix it all up good and well. You may want to, depending on how far ahead you put your granular fertilizer into your soil, you may want to put some granular fertilizer around your drip line. Thank you. I seem to forget that word a lot. You may want to fertilize along your drip line. Now, once your seedling is in and you do that first fertilizing, you can do it with a liquid or granular. I prefer liquid. It goes into the soil right away and it doesn't take time to break down. I also fertilize at bloom set. When you freeze that first bloom start, then you know your plant's starting to set the blossoms that are going to turn into your little tomatoes. So you want to fertilize again then. Be sure to protect your plants against any freeze. I don't know about anybody else out there, but I lost all my tomato plants on this last freeze that we had. I thought I had them covered and protected, but I guess I didn't do a very good job. Pollination ceases and flowers drop when your nighttime temperature goes above the mid-70s. This also affects your soil. Your soil will get warm, and this is one of the advantages of a raised bed and an in-ground bed as opposed to a container bed, is that your soil doesn't warm up as fast as it does in a container. So when the nighttime temperatures are above mid-70, it affects your blossoms, it affects the blossom set, and in a container gardening, it does affect the soil. The soil will warm up and it will also cease your blossoms and your tomato set. Companion planting it's possible with a container garden, but it's really possible with a raised bed and an in-ground. If you're growing a full-blown vegetable garden, that means it's got tomatoes, peppers, squash, cucumbers. Here's a few hints to help you with your vegetables. Many times planting certain herbs with vegetables seems to cause insects to avoid the vegetable plant. Basil, parsley, and mint are great companion plants for tomatoes, but be very careful with mint. If it's an in-ground or a raised bed, mint is very invasive. But you can do container gardening and have some of these items in other containers next to your tomatoes. It works just as well. Marjoram and oregano are good companions to any vegetable that you plant. Potatoes don't like tomatoes, and tomatoes love carrots and peas. So if you have a raised bed or if you have an in-ground bed, plant some peas or carrots around and in between your tomatoes. And that might also help you keep your tomato plants spaced out far enough apart that you will be able to grow these two other vegetables in there, and it'll help your tomato plants. Okay, so tomatoes even have diseases. Now, possibly when you buy at the feed store, if you buy at a nursery, there might be a label with your tomato seedling that will have a code to it. And these are some of your most common diseases for your tomatoes. Probably in this area, because of our humidity, PM or powdery mildew is your most common, but luckily it has a real easy fix. You can make milk with make a liquid milk with powdered milk and sprinkle it on your leaves. It works great. The other one for this area is probably late blight, early blight. Any of the blights are common in this area simply because of our humidity, okay? Your tomato yellow leaf curl virus is sometimes common. And the reason that that's hard to distinguish is that you think, because if your leaves are curled, you're thinking, oh, they need water. But sometimes they're overwatered and they get too moist and humid and it causes that curl virus. Now, when you're looking at these codes, it doesn't mean immunity to these diseases. It means it could potentially have a resistance to these diseases. So when you buy your seedling and it has these codes on it, make sure you look up and see what exactly would happen if this does occur. But don't anticipate that it won't happen. It means it could possibly, but it may not.
All right, what happens if you do have a disease and not you, the tomato, and you need some help? All right, you might want to write this down. Remember, this is being recorded and you will be able to find it on what, Facebook?
Yeah, we'll drop it in the chat.
Okay, we'll put it in the chat too. If you look up the first website, it's Aggie Horticulture. They have a great resources it's a publication called Tomato Problem Solver. And if you go to this website, you can find all sorts of solutions to problems with tomatoes. If you don't want to do it that way, would you rather contact the AgriLife Extension Agent for Brazoria County? As Ruth said earlier, her name is Kimberly Mayer. No, Joanne said that. Her name is Kimberly Mayer. There's her email address and a phone number. And if you can't find what you need, call her or email her and she can help you tremendously. If you, whoops, back.
Sorry.
Back.
I don't know. Oh,
Oh,
keep going forward. Next one. And you tell we don't do technology.
okay. On that
Good
first, website there, you'll see it says Aggie Horticulture .tamu, that's Texas A&M University, and then edu, which means it's education. And then it says vegetable problem solvers and then tomato problem solvers. If you use that exact same website, except stop right after the edu, you will get the whole kaboom at Texas A&M. They have the most wonderful sources there for you, and it's not just for vegetables, it's just about any kind of gardening you want. So you can go there, or you can go all the way to problem solving of tomatoes.
There it is.
All right. Tomatoes have bugs or insects, if you prefer, and they can harm the plants. Here are two of them. The first one on the left is a cutworm. It's a small caterpillar, and it gets to your young plant stems, the ones right at when you first planting them. They get to at the ground level, and they'll eat it right through, and you will have a piece of green stick all lying on the ground the next morning. So it might be a good idea to put a little collar around your thing, maybe a toilet paper roll, not with the paper, just the roll itself, and just stick it in the ground and then put the plant inside that, and that can help keep it away keep the cutworms away. One of the things you'll see even more often is a hornworm. Well, you may not see the hornworm. What you'll see is what he's done. one morning you'll come outside, excuse me, and you'll see an entire branch of your tomato with no leaves on it. They've been eaten. And when you see that, you know you got a hornworm. Hornworms are caterpillars, but they're big. They're at least 3 inches long. And they will hide in your tomato plant and start eating it whenever you're not looking. What you need to do, you know, they don't get a whole bunch on the tomato plant at one time. You know, 2 or 3, and that's probably all that's there. What you do is you start looking for them, and when you find them, you pick them off, and you can either kill it or you can feed it to chickens if you have some. They love it. The problem with the hornworm is that it blends in so well with the tomato plant that they're sometimes very difficult to see or to find. So I've heard that if you use a black light at night, it somehow makes them stand out and you can find them a lot easier.
They kind of glow.
They kind of glow. The 2 pictures at the bottom, the one on the left is a regular hornworm. The one on the right is a hornworm, but it's been, I don't want to say attacked, but a moth.
Bitten.
Is it a moth or a wasp?
Wasp.
A wasp
Bitten.
has bitten on the thing and laid some eggs on it. And all those little white things that you see on the back of the hornworm, there are eggs that will eventually hatch into this wasp, or these wasps, as it were. And it will kill the hornworm deader than a doornail. The problem is that it takes a while for those eggs to hatch, and while they're not hatched yet, that hornworm is still eating your plant. So it's probably better just to go out and look for them and pull them off and eat them. I mean, kill them, let the chickens eat them.
Okay, wait, the hornworm, the 2 pictures on the right-hand side. Well, the one on the left that doesn't have the eggs from the wasp, if you'll notice at the very end, like a little tail, it's a little hard piece of bone that they have. And that's what you can use to pull it off of your tomato plant, and it won't, the hornworm will not get to you. You use that to pull the hornworm off of your tomato branch.
Unless you're real brave and are wearing gloves, you
Yeah.
can pick them up with your fingers.
You.
Ooh.
Ew.
Caging or staking your tomato plants, which would you rather do? Well, either way, you have to do one or the other. It helps your plants produce more tomatoes, and the reason is that it allows your plant to stay straight up. It prevents the leaves and the branches from touching the ground. It keeps your branches up high. When the tomato plants touch the ground, there's a good chance that diseases and bugs will get on them. Caging requires a cage. You're probably familiar with tomato cages. They're made of wire. It surrounds the entire plant. The space between the wires is wide enough to reach through and able to harvest your tomatoes. Okay, so either way, you have got to do one or the other. You need to keep the main stem of your tomato plant as straight as possible. That allows your branches to grow out and allows air to come in. So staking can be done with a stick or a long T-post. The stick, I would advise a bamboo stick. They're extremely sturdy, strong. And the T-post, you tie the branch with, I use zip ties in some cases. You can use a soft cord or a piece of cloth. If you do use the zip ties, don't make it tight. Your main stem has to have a little bit of room to it. Now, some cages are as tall as 5 feet. Your T-post, you can buy 4 feet, 6 feet. It depends on, are you having determinate tomatoes or indeterminate tomatoes? Indeterminate, you absolutely must get something tall enough, and that's probably where your bamboo sticks work better than your T-post. They don't cost as much. You can buy a 6-foot T-post, but suppose that your indeterminate grows more than 6 feet, Your bamboo stick will accommodate that. But you really need the tall post on your indeterminates. You want to keep, is that on another slide?
What?
About the leaves touching the ground?
You just said it.
No. Keeping the bottom clean?
Prevent the, oh, no,
Is that on
might be
another
under
slide?
pruning, yeah.
Oh, okay, under pruning. Okay. I'm probably getting ahead of myself. But definitely you have to do one or the other. Even if it's a determinant, it still has to be caged or staked. You've got to keep that main stem straight so it grows big and strong. Okay, taking care of your tomatoes, watering. Tomatoes need watered deeply, and this is where your soaker hoses are absolutely critical if you have a raised bed or an in-ground bed. You may need to water more than once a week down here in our Brazoria County, either north or south, either one. But you want water on the ground. A drip hose, you can check to see how much water you get. Take an empty tuna can, put it under one of the areas of your drip hose, and see how long it takes to get an inch of water in your tuna can. And that's how long you need to leave those hoses turned on at that strength, okay? When you're watering your plants, please do not let the leaves touch the ground. Do not water the leaves. Do not water the plant. You water the soil. And you water your plants in the morning, not at night. Again, if you should accidentally get your leaves wet or your stems wet, if you water in the morning, those areas have time to dry out before nightfall. Because if you have wet leaves or wet stems at night, they haven't had time to dry out, you're inviting diseases into your plant. Fertilizing your tomato plants should be done before planting. Like I said, mixing your fertilizer, probably granular, into your soil, mixing it very well. And then at bloom set, that's when your flowers start to appear, because from your flowers, your little tomatoes are going to be there. Now, when you first start, you want to start with a 10-5-5 fertilizer. That first number 10 is nitrogen. And nitrogen is what helps your plant grow and gives it its stems and its leaves. It helps the plant itself grow. The phosphorus and the potassium, the 5-5, that's later on for your fruits and your blossoming. So after it has started to bush out and you see a lot of plant and you don't see blossoms, then probably about the 3rd or 4th week, you need to switch to your 5-10-10. You need less nitrogen and you need more phosphorus and potassium, especially at the bloom set, because that's what helps your blossom stay and it helps your tomatoes grow instead of the bush or the vine. Okay. Now, pruning involves 2 things. First of all, getting rid of the suckers and then keeping the bottom 10 to 12 inches of your plant free of growth. So what does this mean? In between your main stem and a branch that's coming off, you're going to see a tiny little branch start to grow. It's like an inside of a V shape. That sucker will take energy from your main stem and your secondary stem. You want to cut those off, break them off. There's controversy that if you take them off, you lose production. I have not found that to be true. It takes off the energy. I get rid of that energy that's taken away from my main stem and my main branches. Keeping the bottom 12 to 10 inches free of plant growth, that's from the soil level to your first branch. I do that because the plant needs air to come up through the middle into the branches. It also allows the leaves to not touch the soil. Leaves get soil on them, you're inviting disease. It allows the airflow up through the plant also. Did I get it all? Harvesting tomatoes, okay? Days to maturity. It's on your seed packet or on the label when you buy the seedlings. But remember, your days to maturity start at the time you actually plant your seedling either in your bucket, your raised bed, or your in ground. That's when your days to maturity start. When they're nice and big and red and plump, even your cherry tomatoes, little tiny 1-inch diameter tomatoes, when they look like they're ready to burst, they're probably ready to pick, and you can harvest them. The days to harvest may be a little bit longer, or it may be even shorter, depending on the weather, the water issues. So that's why gardening is an everyday activity. You want to keep an eye on your tomato plants for bugs, diseases, maybe already mature, even though it's not quite to the days of maturity, but it is an everyday activity. Is it getting enough water? Do I need to fertilize? Is there something wrong with my plant? If you have issues with some animals getting to them first, you can always pick them while they are still a little green. I sometimes have squirrel issues, or I have aphid issues. So I don't let my tomatoes always quite go to the deep, dark red ripe stage. I will harvest them. I will put them on my windowsill in my kitchen, turn them upside down. The stem must be side down, and they will do fine. They will not lose flavor, and they will ripen. Sometimes it takes a week, but they will ripen into their nice big red tomatoes like they're supposed to be. Oh,
While you're enjoying that, let me explain that the background for this PowerPoint is pink. And I did that because we're talking about tomatoes. But for those of you who feel a little romantic, you can also say that I did it because Valentine's Day is coming up. We have a disclaimer here that just says anything we say in the way of an advice of some item, like a product or something like that, is not endorsed by the Texas A&M, and you just have to remember that. We thank you very much for listening. I hope you enjoyed the program. There's the Master Gardener program. It's in Brazoria County office, A&M Life Extension, AgriLife Extension Service, and it's all part of the Texas A&M system. We provide volunteer support in planting and offering educational programs that serve the needs of our county residents. And there is the two websites you can go to. The first one is the Texas Master Gardeners website, where they talk about being a master gardener throughout Texas. And the other one is the Aggie Horticulture website, where you can get all sorts of information. More information that you ever wanted is all right there. We thank you very much, and have a good Valentine's Day and a tomato growing season.
any questions in the chat?
No, but some people saying thank you very much. It was great information. So I
Thank
think
you.
Covered it all.
Wasn't
Thank
bad.
you.